Introduce my chair, Professor Kunal Chattopadhyay, who is a professor in the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University. Sir has been serving as the coordinator of the Center of Studies in African Literature and Culture since July 2017. Prior to his current role, he was a faculty member in the Department of History at Jadavpur University from 1984 to 2009. He is a member of Executive Council of Comparative Literature Association of India. His research interest includes socialist realism, African literature and culture, gender studies, literary theory, academic social responsibilities, and environmental activism. We are very glad to have you here on dais, sir, with us. And then our very notable speaker for today is Professor Lucia Bodrini. She has been a professor emerita of English and Comparative Literature at Goldsmiths, University of London. Ma'am has been the founder and director at the Center for Comparative Literature and honorary professor of comparative literature at University College London. She holds doctorate from the University of Pisa and University of Leicester. Among her books are autobiographies of others, historical subjects, and literary fictions. She is an elected member of Academia Europaea and currently serves as the president of International Comparative Literature Association from 2002 to 2025. Ma'am, it's an honor to have you as the speaker today. Thank you. Over to you. Now, this is a small token of felicitation for both you and sir.
With assumed permission of the chair, we have Dr. Chandramohan's wife, Dr. Ramesh Mohan with us. I'll request you, madam, to please come on the dais. We are honored to felicitate Dr. Ramesh Mohan. Thank you, madam. Yes, Kunalda.
So, without any further ado, I would request Professor Lucia Bodrini to deliver the Dr. Chandra Mohan Memorial Lecture.
Yes, there was, there.
Somebody needs to be here.
Okay. Sorry. So thank you again to the University of Delhi and the Comparative Association of India for organizing this event, bringing the international and the Indian associations of comparative literature together. In particular, I would like to thank CLAI presidents and office bearers very much for inviting me to give this first Chandra Mohan Memorial Lecture. I'm truly and deeply honored to do so. And I also want to thank my assistant there who will move the PowerPoint for me. Now, I cannot claim to have known Chandra Mohan as well as so many of you did. But I hope it is not presumptuous of me to have considered Chandra Mohan a friend. One of those friendships that are first of all professional, but develop into warmth and affection over the years, over the many meetings we've had in many different parts of the world, always within ICLA, International Comparative Literature Association events. I know I first met Chandra in 2010 in Seoul, in Korea, but we didn't talk very much then. We just say hello. We met because I had been elected to the executive and he was there as a member of the executive as well. But I have known him a little bit better since 2011 when I organized a meeting of the executive committee of the ICLA in London, associated with a conference pretty much like this one, which Chandra attended. And I have a memory of a student who I asked to look after Chandra, help him because he was very curious. He kept asking questions, and I was running around organizing the conference. So I asked this student to help me, answer the questions, and if he needed something to help him. And at the end, I asked her, how did it go? And she said, I'm so exhausted. He never stops. He's so full of energy. And that is the Chandra that we know, so full of energy. We then met at many other events and exchanged many emails. Chandra was a very prolific email writer, and as I'm sure you all know, and he liked to copy many people in. His way of making and help making connections, keeping everyone informed, and also making sure that Indian and South Asian comparative literature and achievements of the scholars in this area of the world would be known around the rest of the world. He was very proud of the activities, the work of the Comparative Literature Association of India. And he was also very generous gift giver. I received Indian sweets by post, via his niece Jaya, who lives in London, or personally when we met. I received a pen, a desktop clock, and last time we met, he gave me a vase, or rather, can I have the next photo? The next slide. He gave it to the former president, Sandra Berman, to give to me as a kind of symbol of passing the baton. And he told me, you can give it to the next president in 3 years. And that's the photo where you see Professor Berman, Professor Ratiani, who organized the Congress in Tbilisi in 2022, where I was elected president, Chandra Mohan, and myself. And that is also the photograph that is in the newsletter of CLAI. I was pleased to see that there. And can I have the next one, please? That vase currently lives on a shelf in my study, next to my books on Dante. It has proud of place. But it will be passed on, therefore, as requested, next year to the next president. And the fact that he wanted to mark the passing of a role is significant, I think, because it signals his wish to make connections last beyond one's individual involvement. It speaks of friendship and traditions that work hand in hand. And I would like to mention another gift that he gave me. A book that he had published on Croce and Tagore, Aesthetics, the East and the West, A Study in Expression, Tagore and Croce. Next one. And he gave it to me when we were in Macau in 2019 for the ICLA Congress on that date, and it had just been published. And I treasured the book. What he argues there about the similarities of these two major figures of Indian and Italian literature and philosophy in the early decades of the last century brought to my attention something I hadn't really thought about, Not because it wasn't, because just simply it's not something that I had thought about, had worked with, therefore it was very interesting for me to follow this relationship. But it also showed me his interest in encompassing conceptions of literature and beauty that transcend the moment and that aim at something more universal, more spiritual, that does not exclude reason, but can bypass it through intuition and a sense of oneness with the cosmos that he finds in these writers, and that I would call spiritual, where the word spiritual is perhaps more apt for Tagore than it is for Croce, but is certainly relevant in that context as well. And I saw the same sense of transcendence in his essay on the worldview of Lao Tzu and the Vedic sages, which he published in 2020. And I'm not going to go into details of these essays for reason of time. More recently, I came across an article of his on Indian diasporic writers in the context of globalization, especially with reference to American literature. And I was looking forward to meeting with Chandra and asking him some questions about this. I was curious to see what he saw as the links or the common, his common interest, his equal interest in very different topic between the more traditional, canonical, if you like, and transcendent literary forms that tend to the universal, and the more transient, immediately transient forms of diasporic writing, the fleetingness of postmodernism. And I wanted to have this conversation, but unfortunately I have not had the chance to ask those questions. And there was one other conversation I would have liked to resume that we briefly had in Tbilisi in Georgia in 2022 while we were sitting in a seminar room waiting for a seminar session to start. At my institution, we had, just a few months earlier, had the threat of closure of a program in comparative literature, in translation, and in linguistics, and the threat of redundancies. And he had sent a very eloquent letter of support to our comparative literature program and to the staff teaching it. And he sent it on behalf of CLAI, and he sent it to the warden, the rector of the university. This was just a few months before we met in Tbilisi, and he asked me how things were going, both personally and in terms of the degrees. And on that occasion, we had saved the degrees, and I was going to say I'm almost glad. Glad is not the right word, absolutely not the right word, but I'm glad that I'm not having the same conversation with him this time, as I would have had to explain that this year we have not been successful and comparative literature and translations have been closed, and many colleagues in my institution were made redundant. But, so to go back to our conversation in Tbilisi, we talked about the importance of the humanities, that the emphasis on business and financial reward that is so common in our neoliberal world and neoliberal university means that the humanities are treated as second class compared to business or IT or engineering and so on. But we also talked about how they help people think, and how, therefore, some people, some politicians in particular, do not like them. He was very courteous, as he always was, and he said, "You are young." Well, I'm not, but that's what he said. "You are young, but at my age, I have seen so many things. Literature helps us see that things can be better." We stopped there because the seminar started, but that conversation, however brief and slightly cryptic, I have seen so many things, I would have liked to ask him more about that. That conversation stayed with me, and I think it made me understand better his interest in aesthetics, in the aesthetics of Croce and Tagore and Lao Tzu and the classical literatures of India and also other cultures. And I know that our views of literature and comparative literature and what we value in them were different. When I hear of universals, I start getting a little bit suspicious, for example. I worry that the notion of the universal will erase a minority voice or a particularity that deserves as much recognition as what is immediately recognized and mainstream, which of course doesn't mean that we didn't have value that we also shared. We did. So the rest of this lecture is about what I would have liked to discuss further with Chandra Mohan, precisely because we came from different angles, and my reflections now are prompted by the crisis of the humanities and of comparative literature that we started discussing in 2022 in Georgia. Although proclamations of the crisis of comparative literature return periodically, talk of its death, which was widespread at the end of last century and the beginning of this, has largely subsided, not least perhaps due to the expansion of the prolific field of world literature over the last 2 decades. If debates persist, they're not so much about the death of the discipline, as the title of Spivak's book called it, they're not so much about the death of the discipline as about the relationships between comparative literature and world literature, their definitions and conceptions, their relative legitimacy, and their relations with national or single language literatures. If a cause of what appeared to be comparative literature's fatal destiny was its Eurocentrism and its implication with colonialism, the comparative critical scene is certainly now much more open, thanks also to the critique of the discipline in those years. However, in the last 2 decades, the humanities have continued to be increasingly devalued and defunded across the world. The greater plurality and equality of voice in whose name the crisis of comparative literature was proclaimed now comes under attack in the culture wars sparked by movements such as #MeToo or Black Lives Matter. Can I have the next slide, please? And in the reactionary war on work, where work seems to include any reasonable assumption that all people, whatever their skin color or ethnicity, their gender, sex or sexual orientation, their ability or disability, their class or economic status, should have equal rights and recognition, including recognition as historical subjects and often as victims of historical injustice. And if I may open a small parenthesis here, after the statue of slave owner Edward Colston was toppled in Bristol in the UK in 2020 during a Black Lives Matter demonstration, the governing Conservative Party proposed a prison penalty of 10 years for the crime of damaging statues. Non-violent climate protesters have been jailed in the UK for up to 5 years. The minimum penalty for rape in Britain is 4 years. A rapist may spend less time in jail than a peaceful protester who wants to save the planet, and statues clearly need more protection than women or children. Despite the reaction against wokery, it is so important that women and people from ethnic or racial minorities have started speaking out more loudly, even if it takes a lot of courage, especially in some cultures, to expose, and this is a quotation that somebody in this room will recognize, to expose the abusers, manipulators, predators, and rapists among us, who operate from positions of power in manners often unnoticed by or unknown to those not directly affected, something that happens in all environments, including ours, including the university, and it is important to listen to those voices. That was a parenthesis, end of the parenthesis, not of the sentiment. So, going back to my topic of the humanities and their crisis, in the meantime, degree programs in the humanities shrink or close across the world. There is no taught program in comparative literature left in Irish universities. Colleagues in as different countries as Germany and China tell me of jobs being cut or positions not being renewed in humanities departments. Closures and redundancies, as I know all too well, are widespread in the UK, where successive Conservative governments described humanities and literature programs as, quotation, low-value degrees, and threatened to withdraw funds from them, something that indeed the Japanese government had already threatened in 2015, seeking to abolish the humanities from universities to make space for subjects that supposedly better meet society's needs today. This is a rhetoric that, at least but not only in the UK, where I where I work and where I come from, is directly related to the marketization of education and the introduction of high tuition fees, which were justified when they were introduced in 2011 on the grounds that graduates would quickly earn more than their non-graduate peers. If education is justified only by earning power shortly after graduation, and especially if, as a consequence, humanities degrees lose public funding and need to be paid for mostly or entirely by the student, the corollary is that only those who are already sufficiently well off can afford to study these subjects. Interestingly, literature, the arts, and the humanities continue to be described, including by those that define the degrees that teach them as low-value degrees. Literature, the arts, and humanities continue to be described as pursuits that nourish and expand the mind and the soul. So the further corollary of this situation is that only the minds and souls of the wealthy deserve to be nourished and expanded, re-entrenching the elitism and social divisions favored by those who deem any mildly decolonial or re-enfranchising perspective as dangerous wokery. Certainly, at times when the planet burns and the threat of all-out war is higher than it's been for decades, pearl-clutching about comparative literature degrees may indeed seem elitist. What then can the place of comparative literature be in such an inhospitable context? Can I have the next slide? In The University in Ruins, published in 1996, Bill Reddings described the history of the concept of the university as a trajectory from the Kantian University of Reason through the Humboldtian University of Culture to the techno-bureaucratic notion of the University of Excellence. If the Kantian University of Reason was founded on rational inquiry's combat against tradition, Humboldt's romantic idea of the university was grounded in the historical and ethnic cultural context. Tradition can't be simply abandoned, but must be studied and worked through in order to be understood. Culture, as Reddings put it, names both an identity, the knowledge that is the object of study, and the process of development, the process of inquiry that studies and develops it. Because language and literature are at the center of culture, these are also at the center of university education. In the latter phase of this history, Reddings argues, the university has become a bureaucratic model where accountability becomes accounting. The central figure of the university is the administrator rather than the professor, and the concept of excellence is emptied out of meaning and dereferentialized. And what comes to mind in this context is a former UK education secretary that wanted all schools to be above average, which shows that his numerical ability was rather below average, because you can't have everything above average. It's mathematically impossible. Enmeshed in the economics of globalization, the university no longer trains citizen subjects, but has similar status to, quote, other institutions such as national airline carriers that face massive reductions in foreseeable funding from increasingly weakened states. End of quote. If in the Humboldtian University of Culture, value was seen to reside in the idea of learning itself that supports a nation's identity, now the notion of value seems to have moved quite sharply to the money that it can add to the salary of the graduate who completes the degree. In sum, rather than what will I learn, the question asked has become, how wealthy will university make me? Such a focus on bureaucratic structures and on salary as the outcome of education, coupled especially but not only in the UK with a continuing decline of interest in languages and the devaluing of the humanities, translates in and reflects, it is a vicious circle, reflects a lack of interest in other cultures and otherness. And I must say that I'm delighted, I'm thrilled to see that here there is no sense of decline of interest in languages. The multilingualism of Indian communities is is very exciting, is thrilling, is amazing. It's not the same situation in Britain, it's not the same situation in the States either, United States. To this pernicious notion of excellence, I would like to counterpose as an antidote the value of ignorance. Ignorance in the sense in which Socrates says in the Republic that all I know is that I know nothing, or in the sense in which Virginia Woolf says in On Not Knowing Greek, which she knew rather better than she admits, that we cannot know the Greeks, what they meant when they chose, when they used a certain word or form, because, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, we live in England, and where we see luscious green, they see rocks and scorching sun, and we inevitably reconstruct the world according to our imagination of what it must have been, through what we know, through our knowledge of Shakespeare or of Jane Austen. And Woolf goes further and asks an important question. Are we not reading Greek poetry wrongly? Quote, reading into Greek poetry not what they have, but what we lack. So think of comparative literature and how we multiply our ignorance, our not knowing, when we work across times, languages, and cultures. One of the things we can and should do is use this ignorance, or rather transform into ignorance what we believe we know. Look at the text harder until it stops making the sense we thought it made, until it becomes foreign, stranger to us even when we speak the language of the text that we're reading, until what we lack comes to the fore, not as something to be read wrongly into the text to make it more familiar, but something to be acknowledged as our lack, something that we miss, that we need to rectify or simply acknowledge. Insofar as literature is one of the crucial ways in which a culture examines itself, its past, its aspirations, all aspects of its identity, including the darkest ones, including the way it has formed historically and continues to be formed in the encounter with others, comparative literary studies can be an essential tool, not just in the often repeated mantra of promoting understanding between cultures, which of course it is also that, of course it is also that, but not just that, but also in seeking to understand ourselves better, which also means understanding our limits and lack, through the perspective of the other, through making ourselves stranger to ourselves. And one of the quotations in this context that comes to my mind is Goethe when he writes to Carlyle and asks him about his play, Tasso, that had been translated and was being performed on the stage in England. And he asks, how was it received? What was it like? Because we see ourselves better when we are seen through the eyes of the other. And this echoes something that was said this morning, was said yesterday as well by others. So what I'm thinking about is this acknowledging, accepting that we are ignorant, that we lack something, and try to see that through the eyes of the other, but accepting that strangeness that we have to ourselves, embracing that lack, if you like, that strangeness. I mean, an article that I wrote nearly 20 years ago, which is part of the discussion and reflections that have been sort of carrying on for some time, I suggested that there is a significant value in adopting a comparative approach, treating texts as if written in a different language from ours, even for texts that are written in what appears to be our language. So, for example, a text written in English, or in my case also in Italian, because the language is not necessarily always the same. So, to give a very obvious example, a text written in English in India is not the same English in Britain, is not the same English as Nigerian English. And we think that we can read them. But if we think that we don't need the translation and we stop ourselves from noticing the differences and the specificity of those texts to their cultures, we appropriate them and we misread them. So that's what I was thinking about at the time. And we should not give in to our natural desire to assimilate texts to the language or languages that we think we know. And we must be Next slide. And this is, apology, a self-quotation, aware of the linguistic and formal differences that obtain in works that may not require translation, but require us to acquire an awareness of the translations that we carry out in our own minds and of the necessity not to translate, not to assimilate, to recognize the language in its diversity and its specificity as expression of its own cultural context. As comparatists, we always have to interrogate not only what national, ethnic, linguistic, aesthetic boundaries exist, but how those boundaries are formed historically and in our own practice, and what their implications are. What I'm describing is a discipline that refuses to take itself for granted, that is constantly self-aware and constantly calls into question the premises on which it operates. In the essay Comparative Literature, The Delay in Translation, Stanley Korngold argued that doing comparative literature means studying works written in different languages without the benefit of translation. It means not needing to translate on the claimed strength of being able to translate. So because we know the foreign language, we can translate it, but we don't need to translate because we can read it in the original. Okay, and I admire Korngold's essay. It's a very clever and very thoughtful essay, and I'll come back to it later. And my words, in some ways, echoed his in the point I was making a minute ago. However, for me, it's not just a matter of not needing to translate. It's more a matter of refraining from doing so, of actively seeking to catch ourselves in the act of assimilating what we read to our accustomed ways of reading, interpreting, and understanding. Because by assuming it's the same language, it's our language, the language that we know, that we're familiar with, we do not recognize the translations and assimilations that we carry out more or less consciously in our minds. And it's a matter of actively trying to avoid doing that to the extent that we can. Insofar as these assimilations are often unconscious and ingrained, we often realize that we're performing them, but also because understanding means relating something new to what we already know, and therefore it's inevitable that some level of some assimilation takes place, some translation into what we know. But what I'm saying is that we have to try to catch ourselves in the moment of doing that, to recognize the specificity, the singularity, the difference of what we are translating and assimilating. So, and it is in this sense that I have been saying for some time, including in that essay, and I still believe that. However, paradoxical and provocative this is, that comparative literature can aid us even with monolingual students and readers, of which of course there are many more in Britain than there are in India, to engender greater awareness of difference and diversity, and to lead to a decolonial perspective that helps prise open hegemonic languages and the cultural and aesthetic assumptions that texts written in those hegemonic languages generate and naturalize. And I have had the experience of monolingual students that took courses of comparative literature that afterwards decided to study a language, because instead of studying the language and then doing comparative literature, they were following the opposite kind of trajectory. They understood how comparative literature made them see how important it is to read something in its original expression, and they decided to go and learn a language, and that pleased me very much. Comparative literature can be a valuable and radical discipline in the sense of subject, but especially in the sense of a rigorous practice requiring self-discipline, rather than an elitist one, when it makes us embrace our ignorance, recognize our otherness, the necessity to read what we thought was familiar, what we thought we knew, with the awareness of not knowing, of coming to the text as if for the first time. Filipino-American writer Elaine Castillo writes in her book, How to Read Now, I'm going to read the quotation. When I think about reading and writing, I necessarily also think about silences, erasures, oblivions, and misremembrances, pockets of inarticulacy, Things that are nameless in me, which might touch or be touched by things that are nameless in others, that our lives are often incomprehensible to us, is not just a human fact, part of the mystery of being alive, the mystery of being in the world. It's also a fundamental part of coloniality's legacy. Knowing that there are knowledges that are never counted, never mind recorded as knowledges, this is really the beginning of a decolonial reading, let alone writing. Next. Castillo's description of what she calls the unexpected reader pushes into a powerfully polemical direction Woolf's idea of ignorance, of not knowing, of needing to acknowledge what we lack. And again, I'm reading the quotation which is on the screen. By unexpected reader, I mean someone who was not remotely imagined, maybe not even imaginable, by the creator of that artwork or anyone in its scope. The fact that I was an unexpected reader, an interloper in so many worlds, meant that I was very rarely in any assumed complicity with the writer of the world that she created. It meant that I was almost always lost and always foreign. And she's talking about works. She's Filipino American. She was born in California. And she's talking about works written in English by American writers that address, essentially, are written in the tradition of American writing and essentially address white American readers, and do not think of the differences of a Filipino American or a Mexican American, or different ethnicities, different experiences. They assume a homogeneous idea, or fairly homogeneous idea of America. This unexpected reader is the opposite of Wayne Booth's implied reader or Umberto Eco's ideal reader, both constructed by a text, that is to say, by the conscious or unconscious ideologies of its author. The unexpected reader is a reader that will read the text as an interloper, noticing the erasures and exclusions performed by the text and by criticism on the text. It's not just the foreign reader, but the reader who, while knowing the language, is not addressed, not even envisaged, by the texts that belong to established traditions. Generally, Castillo emphasizes in the bit that I haven't read of the quotation, Western, colonial, white, and I would add generally heterosexual, able-bodied, middle-class, educated. However distant from Castillo's perspective, Stanley Korngold's description of comparative literature as opposed to translation is again useful here, and it remains for me one of the most thoughtful and thought-provoking reflections on the subject. Korngold says, I say that comparative literature is not translation because translation means carrying over a piece of foreign language into one's native or near-native language, the target language. But the act that I call comparison means, in fact, being for one moment without a language. It means being not lost in translation, but lost for translation, being at a place of thought where the target language is absent. And then in the rest of the quotation, he gives the example of himself as an Anglophone critic, reading Flaubert in French, Kafka in German, and in the act of comparison, holding them together in his mind for a moment. But he normally thinks in English. One book is in French, one book is in German. What language am I thinking in at that moment? And he says, it would seem that for a moment I'm left without a language. Then when you start criticizing, when you start commenting, when you start elaborating your thoughts, then you fall back into a language. But for a moment, the act of comparison is being left without a language. And I find that very kind of stimulating, very thought-provoking. That Korngold makes his point with reference to canonical male authors and European major languages, I think, is here beside the more important point of being left without one's accustomed language, and by extension, accustomed ways of thinking that he sees as being inherent in the practice of comparative literature. It is this strangeness of and to our thinking, this dispossession performed by comparative literature as a discipline, it's tasked to confront us with what we cannot quite assimilate to our habitual ways of thinking and to force us, or which should force us, out of ourselves, that I especially value and that I see as one of comparative literature's most important lessons. Woolf's not knowing, Castillo's unexpected reader, Corngold's Being Without a Language are all different from each other, of course, but they all share a willingness, an injunction even, to divest ourselves of the familiar and to recognize and embrace our ignorance. It is what our world today requires more than ever if comparative literature and more broadly the humanities can survive as a relevant, radical, alternative and ethical practice. This is miles away, perhaps, from Croce and Tagore's intuition or as expression, but I think it is something that Chandra Mohan and I would agree on and have a very cheerful discussion about. I am heartbroken that I cannot have this discussion with him, but I rejoice in knowing how lively and rich the discussion would have been and how we'd have pondered about being unexpected, ignorant readers, and yet seeking to go to the heart of what we share beyond all our differences. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to Professor Boldrini for her warm memories of our friend and mentor, Dr. Chandra Mohan, and for the talk. Since this is a memorial lecture, we are not having any question, answers, or comments. So I assume that the session is over.
Thank you very much for all the persons who are sitting here, organizers, and thank you for the respect given to him, for recognition given to him. Of course, he was very hard-working person, and we can say in Hindi that tan man dhan say he served this association. Rather, he helped everyone wherever he goes. And this conference is very well organized. I have seen many conferences because I spent more than 50 years with him and attended many international and national conferences. But I feel very good conference this, and I think nothing is lacking. Program is all very good food, very good residential accommodation, and credit goes to all of you, and especially to Amitav sir, because he was always worried all the time, giving telephone to Amitav at 11 o'clock night, Amitav, and on 27th of March he expired. And on 14th of March, he was in the ICU, and by the senior professors, doctor, he was allowed to have his telephone number so that he can communicate, and he can organize, he can talk to Amitav, but very well, very hardworking and very well planned, well organized conference. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much to all.
So, on behalf of the organizers, we thank the chair, Professor Kunal Chattopadhyay, the speaker, Professor Lucia Boldrini, and Dr. Ramesh Mohan. We'll take a 5 minutes break. You don't have to go outside. We'll take a 5 minutes break to set the stage for the valedictory session. Thank you.
Shortly, CLAI Secretary Professor Shayatan Dasgupta, sir. Is he here? Please, sir. Please. Yes, sir. Professor Taputi Mukherjee, ma'am. And now our very own loving dean and the convener of this conference, Professor Amitav, sir. She's coming. Some of the speakers we are familiar with, but nevertheless, it's always good to refresh and know about them. So I would start with Professor Ravinder Kumar, sir, who is the serving professor and also previous head of Punjabi Department, Delhi University. Sir has been serving as the director, Center for Independence and Partition Studies, and he is also Dean Culture Council in the University of Delhi. Sir has a volume of work to his credit, and he's also the recipient of various prestigious awards with a very long list. To name a few, he has been awarded by Government of Punjab, conferred by Language Department, BB Swarn Kaur Puraskar, conferred by BB Swarn Kaur Trust and Punjabi Sahit Kala Parishad, Dr. Karamjit Singh, etc. Sir is a very promising scholar, researcher and academician, and truly dedicated, enthusiastic, cooperative and hardworking. His commitment to language and literature and culture is still going steadfast. We are grateful to have you here, sir. Please. This is a small token of felicitation, sir. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Professor Marcio Seligman Silva, who holds a PhD degree from Free University of Berlin and also a visiting scholar at Yale and Berlin. Since 2000, he's been a full professor of literary theory at UNICAM, Brazil. His publications include several books and essays in journals in Latin America, USA, Europe, about issues like Walter Benjamin, translation studies, and about violence representation, with focus on Shoah, Latin American dictatorships, and contemporary Latin America art. From 2013 until 2019, he has been a member of EC from ICLA. Since 2019, he's been the vice president of ICLA. Thank you, sir. Professor Shayantan Dasgupta is a professor in the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He is coordinator of the Center for Translation of Indian Literatures there. He is also the Secretary of Comparative Literature Association of India and is a member of Executive Council of International Comparative Literature Association. We welcome you, sir. It's okay. Professor Tapoti Mukherjee, thank you, sir, for the correction. Tapoti Mukherjee was a professor and former dean of Faculty of Arts at Vishwabharati University in Shantiniketan, West Bengal, India. She was the Adhyaksha Rabindra Bhavan and coordinator Tagore Studies of Vishwabharati. She has served as the Director of Culture and Cultural Relations, Vishwabharati, and was involved in many research projects on Bengali literature, folklore, and cultural studies. Her books include The Dharma Shastras in Social Legal Perspective and Scottish Orientalism and the Bengal Renaissance. The Continuum of Ideas, co-edited with Bhashobi Fraser and Amrita Singh. As a professor and former dean of Faculty of Arts, she's played a crucial role in shaping the academic environment at Vishwabharati University. Her leadership roles, such as Adhyaksha of Rabindra Bhavan and coordinator of Tagore Studies, demonstrate her expertise and commitment to promoting Tagore's legacy and cultural heritage. And last but not the least, the convener and the Dean of Arts Faculty, Professor Amitav Chakraborty. Now I request Sir Marcio, sir, to please come. Ravindra sir, please come and grace the thing. Yeah.
Respected Professor Tapoti Mukherjee, President, Comparative Literature Association of India, Professor Marcio Seligman Silva, Vice President of International Comparative Literature Association, Professor Shayantan Dasgupta, Secretary, Comparative Literature Association of India, Professor Amitava Chakraborty, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Convener, Organizing Committee, Office Bearers and Members, Executive Committee of ICLA and CLAI, Members, Conference Organizing Committee and Subcommittees, Deans, Heads, Faculty Members, Delegates, and dear students. It is an honor to address you all at the valedictory session of the 17th International Conference of the Comparative Literature Association of India, organized in collaboration with the University of Delhi. Before speaking about this successful conference, I want to share a story with you from Indian folklore. Professor Shripka sir are requested to come on the dais, please. Professor Shripka, Director South Campus. बायोडाटा इतना लंबा कि मेरा वेलकम एड्रेस रह जाएगा. Shirvika sir, I want to share a story from Indian folklore. Once upon a time, a fire erupted in a jungle. All the animals, birds began running to save their lives. However, a sparrow chose to stay. This sparrow flew to a nearby pond, filled her mouth with water, and dropped it over the raging fire. She was repeatedly doing this action. Other animals questioned that, will your actions make a difference or douse the fire? The sparrow responded, I know that I can't contribute much, but when the history shall record this dreadful day on which the fire erupted in the jungle, I would wish to be remembered amongst those who contributed to putting off the fire rather than those who ignited or ignored it. मेरा नाम आग बुझाने वालों में लिखा जाएगा, आग लगाने वालों में नहीं. Now in the same way, name of each one of you who contributed in this conference is recorded in the academic history of the conferences of CLAI and ICLA, history of the University of Delhi, and as well in the history of the Faculty of Arts. Every individual of this institution, from the sanitation staff to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, has put their heart and soul to this conference. Help from all the sections came in, more than would have been imagined by us. It requires a due mention that this is probably the first three-day conference in the history of University of Delhi where meals served for 3 days are sponsored by different communities, that is Sindhi, Punjabi and Gujarati. This was not a sponsorship rather than a contribution signifying the values of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. This welcome address of valedictory session This welcome address of the valedictory session of this conference signifies three things. Firstly, we are filled with the gratitude and believe that we had welcomed the very right set of academicians who have lived up the purpose of this conference and made it a success. That's why we are welcoming you again. Secondly, this welcome address signifies that all the participants of this conference are always most welcome to the University of Delhi, even in the future also. Thirdly, this welcome is not from an individual, department, or organizer, or university, rather than it is from the values of the Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which is not only an idea, but a lifestyle of the Bharat also. Over the past days, you have come together from various corners of the world to reflect on the significance of the comparative literature and its role in fostering deeper intellectual, cultural, and social connections. As we gather today to close this event, I would like to take a moment to highlight that what we have achieved. This conference reminded us again that literature and culture are not confined to fixed boundaries, but are dynamic and evolving expressions of human existence, surpassing geographical, temporal, and linguistic divides. First and foremost, cultural understanding has been at the heart of this conference. Through comparative literature, you have explored how literature mirrors the values, norms, and historical experiences of different societies. It shows that literature not only reflects culture, but also shapes it. Another important theme that has emerged is the intersection between the comparative literature and the translation studies. We have also seen how comparative literature makes interdisciplinary connections. This interdisciplinary approach has deepened our literary analysis, offering a more holistic understanding of the texts and cultures we study. While this valedictory session marks the end of our conference, the conversations and ideas gathered here will continue to shape our thinking, research, and practice as we move forward. You have proved that dialogue is a new way of human salvation in 21st century, जिसको ऐसे भी कह सकते हैं, बात करेंगे तो बात बनेगी. बात करेंगे तो बात बनेंगी पे एक छोटी सी कविता मैंने आज ही लिखी है, वो आपसे शेयर करना चाहूंगा। जितनी अच्छी बातें हैं सारी तेरी बातें हैं, तेरा मेरा कुछ भी नहीं है, सारी अपनी बातें हैं। बात बतंगड़ बात समंदर, बात बात में मोती है, बात से बच्चा सोता है और बात ही रास्ता देती है। बात सुझाए बात दिखाए, बात ही मंजिल होती है, मंजिल पे जो सो जाते हैं उनकी बात भी होती है, उनकी बात भी होती है। आर्ट फैकल्टी को, क्लाई को शायद मंजिल मिल गई है, पर हमने सोना नहीं है। प्लान योर नेक्स्ट सेमिनार, कॉन्फ्रेंस और वर्कशॉप, and it's my hope that the connections you have made and the knowledge exchanged over the past few days will inspire new collaboration and help us collectively to address the challenges that confront the humanities in our times. The conference also showed us a new way of moving ahead that, Amitwa sir, Dean Sahab, the conference also showed us a new way. That is a CLAI pakdo, ekla chalo. As we bring this conference to a close, I am deeply grateful to each of you for your valuable contributions. Your insights and reflections have enriched this intellectual space, making it a vibrant site of dialogue and collaboration. Once again, thank you all for your active participation and valuable contributions. I wish you safe travels and continued success in your scholarly endeavors of advancing the field of comparative literature. Thank you very much.
In the valedictory, I'm doing something with the permission of the chair, assuming. So today the Sindhi Samaj hosted us and they held Sindhi Bhojan. So there is a representative from Sindhi Samaj. I would request our Dean Culture Council, Professor Ravinder Kumar, to felicitate the representative. आ जाइए सर। हाँ, Rochika Ramani, and the food we had today is from Sindhi Samaj, and she is representing Sindhi Samaj here. So Professor Shipaka Singh, Director, South Campus, it's a token of appreciation from our end. Thank you, Rochika ji. मैं बोल रहा हूँ तुम लोग थैंक अच्छा श्योर
I would like to thank everyone. I hope you all enjoyed Sindhi food a lot. Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot. Thanks, sir. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, with Sindhi food we usually say kari chawal, but today we had many dishes. Professor Shipaka Singh has arrived just now, a few minutes back. Professor Shipaka Singh is the professor of political science. He's a professor of political science. Currently, he is the director of South Campus, Delhi University. I'm thankful, sir, that you could join us. He had a meeting and he was not sure that he might get late, but he assured me last evening that he will come. So I now request Tapoti Di, our President, International Comparative Literature Association, Indian Comparative Literature Association of India, ICLA. Actually, we say ICLA, that's why, to felicitate Professor Shiprakash Singh. Now we are coming back to our program. So I request our valedictory speaker, Professor Marcio Seligman Silva, to deliver the valedictory address.
Yes, like that? Yes, it's okay like that? You can hear? Wow. Well, it's again a pleasure to be here with these honorable colleagues here. I thank very much for the invitation, for the possibility to be here. As maybe you don't know, I come from Brazil a long way, to 20 hours flying to be here. It's a fantastic emotion for me to be for the first time in India and to realize how we cannot think about comparative literature without including the diversity of India, the diversity of cultures, of languages, and all the knowledge that and the experience about all those issues. I'd like to say thank you to Lucia Boldrini, to the organization, and well, for everything she has done so far, from ICLA, Amitava Chakraborty for the invitation to be here, for me to be here, E.V. Ramakrishnan, who invited me to be now here with you. Unfortunately, he could not be here now. Ipshita Chanda for also the help and the organization. And also, obviously, we are all here remembering Chandra Mohan, a friend, a colleague, a person very, very special for all of us. My little paper that we present to you has a new title, actually. It's Disordering Translation and Testimony, Thinking About Borders. We didn't speak before, me and Lucia, but actually there are something in common that we'll be presenting here to you now. Thinking about decolonizing translation, I start, sorry, with a small quote. Everything was one big village before there were no borders. That's a quote from Patricia Ferreira Para Ixapi. She's from one of our original Brazilians that are trying to think the new epistemologies, the post-colonial epistemologies today in Brazil. Thinking about decolonizing translation means approaching it as an act of testimony. Both practices involve an insoluble double bind between necessity and impossibility. Both translation and testimony are concerned with the ethics of interhuman relations and imply a localization of cultures and bodies, deconstructing the falsely universal element of the logos, also recognizing this ignorance, this positive ignorance that Lucia was mentioning here. Both involve contracts, promises, debts that cannot be overcome, but also aim to surpassing as Aufhebung and an overpositioning, Übersetzung. Translation and testimony only exist in the face of their limits, which produces an ethics of care in opposition to the colonial drive. The telos of critical translation is not the institution of a single original culture, but precisely the living together of the different in a community of empty mouths, in the expression from Maria Torok. In need for the other, in order to exist, being for the other, and in function of him, but not against him. The ghost of heteronomy that haunted the enlightened reason is exorcised here in the ethics of translating as a critical process with a new anthropology, a vision of the human being no longer as the Promethean being, autonomous in the pathological sense of the term, enthroned by modernity, but as a fragile, precarious being, lacking of the other, marked by a fundamentally heteronomous dialogical autonomy. Translation and testimony only exist if we have someone to listen, and to be a new spokesperson for testimony and translation, as all you are now here, hearing my testimony. I propose that we consider in this space the relationship between translation and testimony, two devices of interhuman and intercultural relations alongside the notion of border. If translation is a device that can guarantee dialogue within difference, and testimony brings the body and the history to the center of a new non-Eurocentric epistemology, the border develops as a technique of control over these two paths of emancipation. I propose that we think of borderization as the effort of Western modernity to block the emancipatory forces contained in testimony and critical deontologizing translation. Borderization is the front line of coloniality. Establishing colonies implies drawing borders. In the world of the modern era, walls are erected, barriers are established in the seas and oceans, from the Treaty of Tordesillas from 1494 between Portugal and Spain to the current measures to contain migrants in Europe and the USA, transforming the seas once again into cemeteries, as in the time of the slave trade. This is the violent continuity of coloniality. We must confront these walls. The task is to pierce them with arcades, windows, and all possible porosity that we can institute against the action of the norm. Testimony and the deconstruction of the binarities of traditional epistemology. Let us begin with the concept of testimony to understand its role in recalibrating human relations as a device of disordering, which helps us dismantle the machinery of modernity that produces subalternized and dehumanized others. When the artist, curator, and essayist Grada Quilomba states that, I quote Quilomba, one has to say farewell to the place of otherness, end of quote, she retakes the famous question posed by Gayatri Spivak's title, Can the Subaltern Speak? To highlight how this question reproduces colonialism by attributing, I quote Quilomba, an absolute power to the white dominant discourse. End of quote. Instead, one should question this power that is also reproduced in the academy, which reiterates the places of the otherness and becomes a specialist in the culture of these others, disauthorizing and disqualifying black and indigenous voices, and once again depriving them of their right to speech and self-determination. The Brazilian intellectual and playwright Abdias Nascimento in the 70s denounced the strategy of controlling the black population through the reduction of African culture to the condition of empty folklore, which would reveal both derision and avarice, since from the stereotype one moves to the commercialization and the musealization of cultural pieces devoid of vital force and fossilized, a practice that he correctly described as ethnocide. Something similar happened with the diverse indigenous cultures in Brazil. Maybe you don't know, but we had, well, we can't be sure, but it's something that the anthropologists have researched. We had about 1,000 languages in Brazil when the Portuguese arrived in 1500. Now we have only 250. Well, it's still a lot, but we killed 750 languages during this colonial process in Brazil. Something so similar happened with the diverse indigenous cultures in Brazil, which are systematically stripped of their contexts. Indigenous cultures cultural production is reduced to ornaments and trinkets, which are incarcerated in museums or archives, and the existence of their own histories and the fundamental importance of Amerindian populations as both cultural people and as pillars of balance in our environment is denied. Grada Quilomba, I don't know if you know her, but she's a very interesting artist and essayist. She is from Portugal, from African background, and she lives in Berlin. Grada Quilomba highlights a series of polarities that are articulated from the colonial scientific jargon that overlaps with the discourse of the others, that is, the otherized. Universal, specific, objective, subjective, neutral, personal, rational, emotional, impartial, partial, facts, opinions, knowledge, experience. The disordering of these polarities reveals that they only reproduce structures of domination. They cancel the other, projecting it into a less human, more specific place, since this other would be incapable of having a detached general view beyond its specific personal emotional points of view, and therefore supposedly lacking in scientificity. These binaries also include a process of hiding the fact that what is said to be universal, objective, neutral, rational, impartial, and worthy of scientific knowledge is also a construction of a social group that wants to maintain unequal power-race relations. It is with the incorporation of and valuation of the testimonial moment of writing that post and decolonial authors begin their deconstruction of the central and Eurocentric epistemologies, self-declared universal. With the testimonial device and its recognition of the centrality of the place of the self in the construction of knowledge, the testimonial subject becomes a switch to deconstruct these binaries. Non-othering translation can only occur in the context of this testimonial turn of knowledge and being in the world. The Western logos, its logocentrism that aims to control other manifestations differing from the Eurocentric tradition, is otherphobic and ultimately othercidal, or in terms of the historian and philosopher Achille Mbembe, altericidal. The other is considered as being outside the place of knowledge production, residing only in a specific position that is always the antipode of the place of knowledge. The othered is epistemologically banished, exiled to a paradoxical, a topical place. This othered is exiled to the desert, left without shelter and without language. This atopic place, as we shall see, is one of borderization. Quilomba writes, I quote, "White bodies, on the contrary, are constructed as proper. They are bodies that are in place, at home, bodies that always belong. They belong everywhere, in Europe, in Africa, north, south, east, west, at the center as well as at the periphery." End of quote. In summary, we can encapsulate Quilomba's idea with the motto, "For white bodies, there are no borders." Meanwhile, black intellectuals would be doomed to inhabit the periphery, the margins. The body condemned to the colonial discourse to live without a home in the eternal frontier is abandoned to Unbehagen, discomfort, in the concept of Freud, homelessness, and to the Unheimlich, another key concept from Freud. But it must foremost be recognized as an equally worthy actor in the construction of knowledge, homes, and places. This post-colonial recognition of the body as a constructing element of epistemologies views it as a displaced and displacing body rather than as a source of ontotypology. Walter Benjamin spoke of the need to create images resistant to fascism and monological thinking. For him, the image space, Bildraum, should be occupied by critical thought. He also envisioned this image space as a bodily space, Leibraum. Through this incorporation of the body, so to speak, post-colonial and decolonial thought explodes rigid bipolarities and advocates an open view of identity as a process, as becoming and drifting, in opposition to colonial power as a stamping machine and the stereotyping of rigid identities hierarchically distributed between us and the others. Web Du Bois, Franz Fanon, Abdias Nascimento, Beatriz Nascimento, Yat Spivak, Stuart Hall, Mbembe, Quilomba, Nidkung, Saidia Hartman, and many other thinkers who allow the articulation of the post-colonial critical thought start from their experiences, their bodies, and their subjectivities to reveal that all knowledge is structured from individuals living in society, acting within it, and enduring its coercions. In the field of translation, I recall that Stuart Hall speaks of a Caribbean process of cultural translation that possesses, above all, an Afro-Caribbean hyphenated character and therefore indicates a diasporization. Therefore, we see how one of the central moments of this diasporic and pan-translational Caribbean vision is how the translations are resignifications of African survivals occur under the sign of trauma work. It is a translation derived from trauma and simultaneously performs the work of trauma. Traumaarbeit, in parallel to the notion of the work of mourning, Trauerarbeit. This translation process should enable, as Quilomba wrote regarding the task of criticizing colonialism, the creation of new roles outside this colonial order, allowing the colonization of our minds and imaginations, or promoting the disordering that another art curator from Berlin, from African backgrounds, describes as disordering, as Bonaventure Nidikung says. If otherness is the embodiment of what the white subject does not want to equate that with, the task of critical cultural translation is disordering. This disordering aims to act against infantilization, primitivization, animalization, and eroticization, which Quilomba identifies in the construction of the other. The task of thinking about this decolonial translation implies conquering a place of self for everyone. I quote again Grada Quilomba. Every time I'm thus placed as other, I am experiencing racism, for I'm not other, I am self. End of quote. The otherized subject is incomplete, as their subjectivity is curtailed in political, social, and individual terms. Quilomba narrates how black women living in Berlin, the places from which she writes, are constantly authorized and feel a demand to erase their blackness, whose signs are considered repulsive. Part of colonization is the control of bodies, hair, and clothing, which objectifies, infantilizes, and animalizes the other. A decolonial translation must be the opposite of the translation that invisibilizes difference, without, however, failing into the production of an ontological difference associated with aesthetic signifiers and related to pure origins. Rather, the colonial translation, constructing other culture of living together, must know how to affirm difference non-ontologically. And going to my conclusion, small. water first. Bordering as a blockage of the circulation of bodies and languages. And Out of the Dark Night, Akili Mbembe dedicates a good part of the essay to a critical historical review of post-colonial studies. At a certain moment, we read something important in our context. I quote Mbembe. This quote is very important for my presentation. The best of post-colonial thought considers colonization neither as an immutable and historical structure nor as an abstract entity, but rather as a complex process of simultaneous invention of borders and intervals, of zones of passage and interstitial or transit spaces. At the same time, it emphasizes that, as a historical and modern force, one of its functions is the production of subalternity. Various colonial powers established subordination in their respective empires based on racial foundations and sometimes different legal statuses, but always and ultimately inferiority. End of quote. Mbembe's reflection on the border culminates in his concept of borderization, and I quote Mbembe again. Capturing, identifying, dividing, sorting, selecting, and classifying are not acts exclusive to artificial machines. Borders also practice them, places where, for many of our contemporaries, the world falls apart and globalization reveals its limits. Indeed, all of this refers to the border, the zero place of non-relation and denial of the very idea of common humanity, of a planet, the only one we have, shared by all, and to which we are linked in the common condition of passengers. But perhaps it would be necessary to be rigorous to speak more of borderization than of borders. End of quote for Akili Mbembe. Bordering techniques creates insurmountable barriers. They can be read as blocking bodies, lives, classes, languages, and specific ethnicities. It is a supremacist construction of the self guarded by its steel borders. Monolingualism rises here on the border as an authoricidal colonial machine. This border zero place of non-relationship and denial of the very idea of common humanity reveals that the concept of humanity is actual an enlightenment invention made to cover up its production of the inhuman, the dehumanized, animalized, and abjected. I landed on the border. It also established a culture of silence. As the great Quilombola is someone in Brazil that descends from the traditional African communities. As the great Quilombola Antônio Bispo dos Santos wrote, contrary to the project of humanism and the unique construction of the human in A Terra Dá, A Terra Quer, the earth gives, the earth wants. So I quote Antônio Bispo, while society is made up of equals, the community is made of diverse people. We are not humanists. Sorry. We are the diversos. He creates this word. In Portuguese, we don't say diversais. He creates. We are the diversos, supporters of diversity. It means the cosmological, the natural, the organic. We are not humanists. We quilombolas. We are all cosmos, except the humans. End of quote. In the colonial machine, in turn, no space for testimonies, no narratives, no plurilingualism and translations. The 0 point of non-relationship in the is the necropolitical space. It is the fissure that deepens the traumas of modernity. The politics of border as a blockade of circulation produces lives and bodies considered superfluous, with no place in a society dominated by a cult of artificial intelligence and post-work. Exoticized and criminalized bodies are hunted and slaughtered if they do not respect the imposed limits. If before the Capitão do Mato, something that we had in Latin America, that he was the slave driver, hunted fugitive slaves, today the new incarnation of these human hunters targets those who try to escape their captivity by trying to infiltrate beyond the borders of the metropolises. Modernity seems as a complex process of simultaneous invention of borders and intervals, of passage zones and interstitial or transit spaces, as we saw with Mbembe, reveals itself as a story of metamorphosis of its fortification systems. If until the 18th century walls, military fortresses, prisons and chains still predominated, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, new hunting and body control techniques developed. From identification photography to ubiquitous security cameras and satellite images, borders are increasingly consolidated to block the movement of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Refugee camps become one of the most frequent bio-necropolitical figures in this war against lives rendered superfluous and placeless. Internally, prisons are erected at a breakneck pace to imprison bodies descended from those enslaved. Mbembe recalls that before 2015, the beginning of the new wave of shelter seekers, there were around 400 refugee camps in Europe. In the next year, the camps on this continent were already home for 46,000 people. Europe specializes in hunting, capturing, regrouping, classifying, separating, and speeding in a war against other people that intends to consecrate as an exclusive privilege for Europeans the right of possession and free movement throughout Europe on a planet over which, however, we all have rights. Terms such as freedom and security are deprived of any meaning, as freedom is debated in the face of the hunting and imprisonment of millions, and security within a process of fortification of Europe is as fragile as it is false. It is no coincidence that far-right authoritarian politicians are being brought to the power in this process. They shamelessly embody the ideology of borderization, genocide policies, and the construction of a concept of freedom that only applies to supremacist minorities with their expressions of other-result hatred. Faced with these rather discouraging pictures of our contemporary times, and I'm sorry for that, we are left with the task of attacking and exploding the mechanism of subalternizing ordering that are proliferating. It is about opening spaces for listening to testimony, passages for the flow of translations that establish an authentic relationship of non-domination and effectively dialogic between the self and the other. The challenge is to radically transform borders, leaving behind their form of fortification to produce in their place spaces of dialogue, meeting, and free movement of people, language, and ideas. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you, sir. Now we invite Professor Shri Prakash Singh Ji, who is also the chief guest of this session. Sir is the director of South Campus, University of Delhi, and an instrumental figure in holding and organizing this conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amitabh, for having me here. And while inviting me, Amitav made a plea that perhaps this one is the last bigger program in my deanship, and I'm hoping that you will join me. So being a friend, I could not say no to Amitav, and I made it sure that I'll attend this program in any of the capacity. Thank you so much for making me guest in this valedictory session. Friends, on dais we have Professor Marcio Selva, Professor Tapti Mukhopadhyay, Professor Ravinder Singh ji, Professor Sainath Dasgupta, Professor Kulveer Godhra in audience, Professor Vijaya Venkat Raman. Thank you. Professor Satyanath, one of the senior faculty, Professor Ramesh Mohan, Professor Kadri, dear students and friends from various countries. Amitabhji told me, including Delhi University, 69 institutions were represented in this seminar. Huge congratulations to you and your team effort. And out of 69 countries, 69 institutions, 9 foreign country institutions were represented in this very program. Congratulations, Amitabhji, for making this program such a monumental and unique program for your own department and arts faculty. And this will motivate other departments to create such an atmosphere and effort so that they can compete with you. Congratulations again. Friends, I am a student of political science, and when I look at this theme, comparative literature, alternative humanities, ethics, effects and everyday social, I started thinking how comparative study contributed to political science. Though there are scores of examples, but I'll quote 3 examples here, how political science as a discipline have been beneficiary of this comparative approach or comparative analysis or comparative study. And that one is contributing even today and will contribute in future. Aristotle, one of the leading Greek philosopher whom we consider father of political science, though he is a contemporary of Kautilya, he was there with Sikandar and Kautilya was with Chandragupta in India. Both philosophers have given a text. One is The Politics by Aristotle, another one is by Kautilya, the Arthashastra. In Arthashastra, Kautilya talks about 13 other Arthashastra with reference, and reaching on certain conclusion for statecraft. That one is not possible without a comparative study. Whatever we have in form of Kautilya today, that one is outcome of a comparative study. In its 15th chapter, Tantra Yukti, he deals with research methodology. Today, in social sciences, we are very much limited to the system, schools of thought given by the Chicago School of Thought. And majority of time, we end up with scienticizing the political science or other social sciences on certain parameters, and those parameters are in number called 10 numbers only. Friends, if you will read Tantra Yukti, the 15th chapter of Arthashastra, you will find that in Arthashastra, he is using 32 tools. And he is referring there. In Susruta, there are 36 tools. In other words, for Ayurveda, for medical, for surgery, there are 36 tools to reach on certain conclusion. And for social sciences, for administration, for statecrafts, he is suggesting 32 tools. It's a huge number. And how researcher will maintain its neutrality, that tool is very much there. I'm not going into details what those tools are, but just wish to remind our academia that in Arthashastra, he refers about 13 other Arthashastra, those who were existent prior to Kautilya. Another example from Kautilya, how prior to Kautilya, with the impact of Buddhist belief system, there are only three purushartha: dharma, artha, kama. But with the intervention of Buddhist literature, the Pali literature, the fourth one comes in form of moksha, fourth purushartha. Because in Buddha, in Pali literature, we find the references of nirvana. That is again became possible with the comparative literature, and its impact is visible to our own societies. I was referring Aristotle. The biggest contribution of Aristotle to political science and humanities or statecraft all across the world is the governance models and the types of governments. While suggesting the types of government, he talks about monarchy, oligarchy, and polity, that is democracy of the day. And to reaching on this conclusion, he evaluated 154 constitutions. Some of them were non-written, majority of them were not written, but some of them definitely had some literature. And that one is the biggest contribution of Aristotle by having the comparative study of all these practices and the constitutions of that time. Another example in India that will interest our own students and will connect very easily is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar became chairman of drafting committee, and today we credit Dr. Ambedkar for creating lengthiest constitution, most descriptive constitutions of the world in form of Indian constitution. Why this task was given to him? This task was given to him because of his caliber, because of his knowledge of various constitutions. And Dr. Ambedkar knew about 60 constitutions of the world. It was his comparative knowledge of these institutions and practices that he could give us a wonderful constitution which gave this successful democracy last 75 years. Friends, when you will read Indian Constitution or its background, then you will find sources of the Indian Constitution. We find directive principles of a state have been taken from Ireland, fundamental rights from United States of America, Rajya Sabha structures from South Africa, something from Germany, something from Canada, something from Australia. This became possible because of Dr. Ambedkar's comparative insight of the constitutions prevailing all over the world. With these background, I won't take much time, but wanted to tell how political science have been beneficiary of this comparative structure and politics. If we look at why this comparative study or comparison of literatures or study of literature, as a researcher, when we prepare a proposal or the research theme, we take a hypothesis, and to testify that hypothesis, we go into the literature. Primarily in form of literature review, later on in form of comparative study. And with that, we reach on certain conclusions, sometimes justifying the hypothesis and sometimes refuting our own hypothesis in our researches. But when as layman we start thinking on it, why comparative? Why to compare? To my mind, it's a quest for betterment. When we compare, when we take a comparative look at these existing literatures, then our effort is for the betterment. To understand better the problems, to get more informations, to get more data for ourselves. And that data, that information helps policy makers and its implementations. And it makes things more systematic so that whatever political systems or institutions or our researchers are doing, that will contribute to our academics. When we look at the comparativeness of the literature, sometimes we go with similarities, sometimes we go with differences, sometimes, rather I will say majority of times, with this descriptive nature of comparative study, we are compelled to think something more to it. Because it's an exploration of our mind towards a given problem, towards given a subject, towards given an hypothesis. And with that exploration of mind, we reaches on certain conclusion, and that comes out as a new finding to us, new research to us. That one is a contribution of comparative literature. Friends, whether it's interdisciplinarity, or it's a preservation, or knowing the things from past, everything comes into the domain of comparative literature. And lastly, I'll say this comparative study increases our education value. And that increased value of our education contributes to society, to our students, to our faculties. You have debated on this very issue since last, today is the third day of the event, last 3 days. Number of ideas are with you. I'm just concluding saying again, congratulating again Department of Modern Indian Languages and Arts Faculty and its Dean Professor Amitav Chakravarti for having such a program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now we invite Professor Shayantan Dashgupta from Jadavpur University to deliver his CLAI Secretary's address.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are in the final session of the 17th CLAI Biennial Conference, which is being jointly organized by CLAI and the University of Delhi. I'm sure this has been a learning experience for all of us. It has been a wonderfully enriching opportunity for all of us, and I think all of us will agree that we are taking away a lot from this conference. Not only have we had the CLAI conference, but we have also this time, after many, many years, had an ICLA Executive Committee meeting in India. This is something that was kind of a dream for Professor Chandramohan, our General Secretary, who has been at the helm of our organization for many, many years, who's been leading the organization. And it's a wonderful result of his efforts and of CLAI's efforts and ICLA efforts that we have had this ICLA EC meeting. There's a wide range of topics and areas that have been covered during the proceedings of this conference. We have had presentations by scholars from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, focusing on various emerging trajectories of comparative literature. One of the most heartening things as CLAI Secretary for me in this event has been the active participation of younger scholars. We have seen, I think, a record participation of young people, young scholars from all over the country, and I think they deserve a hand for the kind of contribution they have made. All of this bodes well for the future of comparative literature in India and the world. This was a wonderful platform, and I'm sure we will be able to use whatever has happened over the last 3 days in the interests of comparative literature. We will hopefully see more activities, more participants doing comparative literature in India. And comparative literature, as we know, is above everything else. It's about showing a respect for alterity, it's about an openness, it's about a holistic study of literature and culture, and I think all of us will agree that these are attitudes we have seen being disseminated over the last 3 days. At the end of this event, we hope from comparative literature that there will be further trajectories that we will be able to explore. Indian comparative literature, which has developed, taking on a unique trajectory of its own over the decades, will go on further and try to redefine itself, relearn itself, shape its own trajectory. And at the same time, even as we do comparative literature our own way in India, we will also see greater interaction with the international community of comparatists, which has already been growing. Our interaction, activities, collaborations with the ICLA has been really increasing over the last several years, and I'm sure we will be doing that as well. And that will do justice to the inheritance that Professor Chandramohan has left us, and I think we have enough room, enough cause to be optimistic about the future of comparative literature in India. Finally, on behalf of the Comparative Literature Association of India, I would like to thank the organizers, our hosts. Thank you for all the effort you have put into this event. We have done this together, collaboratively, and I'm sure there will be more occasion to work collaboratively. I must finally thank, on behalf of CLAI, the students of this university, the student volunteers who have been working so very hard with us and trying to resolve every single problem that crops up. So a big hand for the students. Thank you very much.
So now we are opening the session for participant feedback. Someone please, yeah. So please raise your hand, and the participants will be given hand mics. Please use that. That's what South Campus Director Shiprakash ji and I were wondering about. इतने कैडबरीज यहाँ पे क्या कर रहे हैं?
Without the student volunteers, this would not have run so smoothly. Therefore, we would like to ask to offer to all the student volunteers a little token of our appreciation. So let's scroll them.
But we have too many volunteers. You cannot read each of them here.
This is symbolic, so
Yeah, let us keep it symbolic.
we give them to you, and symbolic all of the and then you will distribute them.
Thanks to CLAI President Professor Boldrini and CLAI Secretary Professor Ipshita Chanda. Now, if participants want to, now we are seeking participants' feedback. Please raise your hand, and yes, please.
Hello. So I just want to thank the organizers because we had certain problems with our calendar on the first day. But after our request, the organizers agreed to set a plan for us, and we are going back with really happy memories and impetus for our academic growth. So I wanted to thank all the organizers for ensuring our participation and a good time over here. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
It's all going on? Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I would like to thank the organizers of the CLAI and the invitation I got from Ipshita Chanda. It's not me. And the correspondence, which was so quick and so, yeah. Oh, poof, no. So direct by Amitav, and I thank particularly to all the participants and to all colleagues. And why do I am here? Since about 20 years, I've known Ramesh and Chandramohan privately and professionally, and I thank very much the CLAI organizers and the CLAI members to continue the invitation I've got this time also, and I am very glad that that will continue further on. So thank you very much, and then thank you very much the volunteers who have been so attentive, so hearty, so so present. So thank you very much for all.
Anyone else? Is it
Hello.
on or off? Okay.
Hello, I would like to thank CLAI and Delhi University for organizing this wonderful 3-day, I think it was sort of a churning that led to a lot of ideas in our minds. And personally, I would like to mention that I have just started my PhD journey. So to attend this conference at just the start in the first quarter of my admission has been very fruitful. And right from the first day onwards, Amitav sir and the entire organizing team have had us spoiled for choice, because there have been 6 parallel sessions in each timetable. So to mark and to figure out that which sessions I want to attend and then run back to them so that I can ask the questions also has been a wonderful experience. And not just comparative literature, in terms of the literary works, but comparative literature in the form of its impact on music or dance or the Anthropocene articles, or related to several other peripheral studies that are related to CLAI. So I would like to thank once again that we got an opportunity to attend this. Thank you, sir.
So I think that's it. Okay. So Professor Shripaka Singh has another meeting, so he will have to leave. This way. Now I request Professor Tapoti Mukhopadhyay to deliver the President's address. Tapoti, I mean, by now we all know, so Tapoti Di is the President of the Comparative Literature Association of India.
Namaskar. Respectable valedictory speaker, my colleague and my one-time student, Secretary CLAI, Dr. Sayantan Dasgupta, coordinator of this conference and Dean, Delhi University, Professor Amitabh Chakraborty, my distinguished colleagues of ICLA and CLAI, erudite resource persons, professors of respectable professors of Delhi University and other colleges and universities of Delhi and nearby areas who have assembled here. My near and dear participants with whom we have spent all these 3 days, which will be ever present in our memory, paper presenters, participants, and last but not the least, the most important constituent of this 3-day-long conference, our young students, volunteers. At last, our cherished dream has been, I'm sorry to, forgot to mention Ramesh ji. At last, our cherished dream has been realized. We could make it. We could organize 17th CLAI Biennial Conference, International Conference, and at the same time, executive meeting of ICLA under the hostship of Delhi University. We were disadvantaged at the initial stage by the sudden death of our erstwhile secretary, Professor Chandra Mohan, and we have faced, as in the case of all other conferences and seminars, various other adversities. But finally, it has been proved that with the collaboration of Delhi University, we could finally overcome them. And we have a proverb, all is well that ends well. In Bangla, we call it, Shab bhalo jar shesh bhalo. At the same time, it is indeed heartening to note so many erudite scholars, so many illuminating scholars from various parts of the globe assembled in this conference. Equally fascinating is the fact that so many young scholars from different parts of India and from abroad have come over here to present their papers with which we are indeed, as pointed out by Shantan, we are indeed enriched, which has also, in my opinion, added a new dimension to the literary discourse of comparative literature. This is no mean achievement. At the same time, I will be failing in my duty if I don't mention that finally we have succeeded in propagating comparative literature as a medium of academic expression which includes equity and inclusiveness, which aims at eradicating artificial demarcation and alienation of so-called quote-unquote other and embracing all with a bond of fraternity and compassionateness. Needless to say that in a multilingual country like India, comparative literature is the sole medium of integration, of bringing unity in diversity. The concept of this oneness, which is the fundamental spring of Indian ethos of life throughout the centuries, as has been echoed by Rabindranath in his essay, Bharatbarshe Itihasher Dhara, is the basic underlying concept of comparative literature. The present conference, I am so happy to present before you, and I am sure all of you will agree with me when I say that this present conference has thrown light on some not so discussed, not so illuminated corridors of Indian literary discourse, which will, I am sure, as pointed out by Shayantan, that it will, and it not only enriched us, but at the same time, it will throw light on some unexplored areas of literature. Many illuminating articles have been presented, as I mentioned earlier, which add a new life to the literary studies. At this final hour of the conference, I once again remember Professor Chandra Mohan, as has been done by me, the inaugural session. With a sad heart, we remember, we pay our tribute to Professor Chandra Mohan, who was the driving force of CLAI at all stages. I take this opportunity to convey on behalf of CLAI my sincerest thanks and profound gratitude to the coordinator of this conference, Professor Amitabh Chakraborty, once again, for his hard labor, perseverance, and cooperation in organizing this conference and EC meeting of ICLA. It is not an easy task to bring 14 literature departments under one umbrella. I state and reiterate, it is no mean task, no easy task at all. And steered the cause with unflagging spirit against all possible odds. Indeed, Amitabh, who is much younger to my age, and so I address him as Amitabh. Amitabh could prove his academic and administrative mettle in organizing this 3-day long conference. I express my gratitude on behalf of CLAI to Honorable Vice Chancellor, Delhi University, and other dignitaries who were on this stage a few minutes back and also in the inaugural session. We are indebted to Registrar Delhi University, deans of various faculties, head of the departments, teachers, staff, and many other who leave no stone unturned to make this conference a grand success. I must mention once again a special thanks for my young student volunteers who worked day and night to help us and make our stay, our presentation, our discourse comfortable. All of us will go back home with these smiling, with the memory of those smiling faces who are with us for these 3 days. Their memory will be always in our heart. I am sure all of you will agree with this sentiment, which I feel as a cherished memory of my heart for my days to come. And last but not the least, at the final hour, all of us feel sad and nostalgic to say goodbye to Delhi University, to Amitabh, to our all teachers, staff, members of Delhi University and others with whom we spent all these 3 days. But we will depart at the same time with a note of hope, a note of inspiration, even in these gloomy days when we feel frustrated and traumatic under the prevailing circumstances throughout the global scenario. I conclude with a words of, once again, I take refuge to Rabindranath, what he said in his Gitanjali song offerings, যাবার আগে এই কথাটি বলে যেন যাই, যা দেখেছি, যা পেয়েছি, তুলনা তার নাই. Let this be my parting words, that what I have seen and suffered is unsurpassable. ধন্যবাদ, নমস্কার, thank you.
So Vedika wants to say something on behalf of volunteers. Okay.
आप सभी को मेरा नमस्कार. Good evening everyone. So I stand here on behalf of all the volunteers who helped organize this 3-day long conference. So the scope and scale of this conference has been huge. More than 175 papers were presented over the duration of 3 days, and we tried to make this a comfortable and enriching experience for you all. And thank you for being so gracious, so understanding, and I understand there were some gaps on our part, but thank you for being so understanding, so kind, because it has been a very enriching experience for us as well as volunteers. We got to learn what to do, what not to do, and so thank you so much. It's just, I want to thank you all, and this, as students of DU, this has brought us much closer. We were all strangers when we started working for this conference. But because we have been working day and night since past few weeks, there is this feeling of, like I have Ayush, I treat him like my younger brother. There are some people I treat like my younger sisters and elder sisters and brothers. So it has been very enriching for us. So thank you we had the chance to organize this. Thank you for CLAI and ICLA for that. Thank you to CLAI and ICLA for that. And yeah, just thank you so much. And
So it's my turn to thank you. I'll not go into that official format, please permit me. I'll just share 2-3 things. It has been an interesting journey since the point came. Professor Chandramohan told me to host this. I was not in a position to host or organize anything at that juncture. But then, of course, those who have seen Chandramohan know that he can make you accept what he wants to do. He did that. But of course, comparative literature was very important part of my life, own journey also. From the discipline of Bangla, I started teaching Bangla in Tripura University. When I came to Modern Indian Language, my department, Modern Indian Language and Literary Studies, I was appointed as a reader of Bangla. And when I entered my department, first 6 months I was wondering what was I doing there. Then slowly I got acquainted with comparative practices. One person whom I call, I mean his lectures, the things, issues he would talk helped me. This is Professor T.S. Satyanath. And Rabindra Kumar Dasgupta's one lecture where he said that he dreamt of a breed of scholars who are rooted in the vernacular but are bilingual. They write in both and they have to compare to understand their own literature. And for long I have been wondering why my department, which teaches comparative Indian literature, doesn't invite those teachers who are teaching Punjabi, Urdu, Sanskrit, Hindi, just because those are other departments. So I thought that would be a good occasion for us to come together and try to do. It's not just about language. We know that the last stage that would be is from various disciplines. So a philosopher working with a literature students who is in ethics or aesthetics. So it was a great dream. And of course, as friends, I had the head of the departments and other colleagues. But well, the journey was not easy. In the organizing team, I'll just say two things. One is that, including me, there are a few members who easily get angry and don't keep it to themselves. So, Topotidi and Kavita Sharma ji, they had to take a lot of pressure because now I am angry and I'll say, okay, मुझसे नहीं होगा. And then next day I'll say, yes, I'll manage it. Another problem is that I don't take calls. I have some phonophobia. Ravinder, she can tell me. So that way moments happened when I felt ashamed of what I had written in anger, which is not good, right? You feel very bad next day. And at the same time, I felt grateful that even then people kept on working. I must say one thing for CLAI members. Their love for their discipline is something which is very beautiful, very strong and beautiful. Because I have run an organization of Bengali scholars, International Society of Bengal Studies for 15 years. I wouldn't say that I have not seen people just leaving, quitting. CLAI members never quit. Then comes the Delhi University part. So today when the Sindhi Bhojan was happening, someone told me, you are a good manager. I said, no, I'm a very bad manager, but I have good friends. So I thought various cuisines and the expenditure would be, I talked to someone and the expenditure would be huge. So I called my friend Ravi Tekchandani. Immediately the Sindhi cuisine was confirmed. Then I called Ravinder ji. He talked to Delhi Namdhari Sangat. Punjabi cuisine was confirmed. And wherever I failed, I had a few friends who would come out. When you work with such a big team, we know we Indians have a very interesting quality. We never say no to the responsibility. But you will never understand where I have actually not done anything for last 2 months. I also do that. But that puts the organizer in a problem. In the opposite, I have such people whom I found working day and night when a particular area was facing any problem. And volunteers also belong to the same, but a few are like they want to do everything on their own, and I had to stop them. And Vedika is here, who was here talking. So the moment you go to the volunteers group, they have been working in my office for last 2-3 weeks, right? You go to the group and you say, see, this should be done. Vedika will, yeah, I'll do it. And then at times that led to, not only Vedika, there are quite a few others. At times that led to something else not being attended. All of these taken together, we have faltered a lot. I'm sure there would be a lot of problems, because this experiment was also new, that we do not hold the parallel sessions in one single building, and so that our departments can also have the opportunity to participate in discussions. But I didn't know that this will be so rainy. This September is usually not that rainy in Delhi. But anyway, after all, some people are still angry, some people will get more angry, and some people will get more supportive. I must thank specially Professor Kavita Sharma, who is right now not in country, but every morning and evening she is talking, and even from there she is managing issues. To resolve issues, she is intervening. I will not name any of my colleagues, because the list would be too long. After today, after this seminar, if I have to read a vote of thanks, you will have to spend the whole night perhaps. I had my office people, 2 of them have not gone to their place for last 4 days. They are staying here. Any problem, my staff, it is not their responsibility, it is not their job description. I feel so overwhelmed to get this much of support and love. Thank you all. At the end, we want to show 2-3 things. So, we are not, of course, not in a position to prepare a full report. But yet, as I said, I have those volunteers who will work day and night. They go home, and after 2 hours, I start saying this, and they keep on working. So anyway, so we wanted to understand which are the major areas in which papers were presented. So they did a search of keyword and titles. So it seems cultural studies, translation studies, identity and resistance are the 3 major areas. There is actually cultural studies, translation studies, identity and resistance, literary studies, comics and graphic studies, religion studies are the most prominent areas. I have not yet understood why folklore is just 1.9%, theatre performance 9%, gender sexuality 11.5%. Of course, this is the final, but I wanted to show you because these colors with the areas gives us a sense of the things. Next is, so we wanted to see institutional participation. इंस्टीट्यूशनल नहीं, वो नहीं, चार्ट दिखाओ, नहीं दिया, इसके लास्ट पेज में होगा, नहीं है तो ये पढ़ के फायदा नहीं. हाँ जा रहा है ना, जा रहा है. हाँ इसको बड़ा करो. This is wrongly said number of speakers. It's actually number of institutions. Now you can see Delhi, University of Delhi and Jadavpur has 43.4 and 43.4. I'm sure in other CLAI, Delhi would have lesser number. Jadavpur will have the most. Because this is happening here, and I can see already a lot of my friends, colleagues who are teaching in other departments are now going into or finding an interest. This would be the most important achievement of this program. Then IFLU, Vishwabharati. I don't see, there are so many institutions of, or departments of, this is for you, CLAI, to also think. When I was going through this, it still seems that the majority of participants, if you take together Jadavpur, Vishwabharati and few other organizations, institutions, are from West Bengal. In South India, we have so many departments. In North India, we don't have departments of comparative literature, not too many. But in South India, we have so many departments of comparative literature. If the participation is so low, either we as university have not reached them, or as CLAI, of course it's a matter for you to discuss, because this might be different from Delhi in other organizations. So these we will send as a report, and our social media team, they have created Insta group, etc., etc., etc. I saw one, and then I said, now I'm not going to share. We'll see that later. But they have made a 6.6-minute video and collage of photographs. So I'll just want them to show that, and that would be the end of it. I'll not talk more. Let's go over there, then start. So yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. We are going there so that we can see.
Total number of volunteers कितने थे?
मैं डाटा रखता हूँ. हाँ. Volunteers हो हमारे organization. क्या चल रहा है?
I'm sorry guys, there's some problem with the sounds and the video does not look half as good as it does with the sound. So maybe we'll email this to you. Let's see. So you can move out here. We have height here. Wait. Okay. Height is arranged right outside the auditorium. Please.